theyeshiva.net.
Necha Kachadashim.
Easy for him to say.
How do you know? Vayishlach Yaakov. Yeah, the last line, Maamer Chav Daled, the second column, 47, the last line. So Yaakov is coming back after a long journey, and he wants to meet and reconcile with his brothers. He says, Vayishlach Yaakov. So he right away explained, Yaakov and Eisav represent two different realities. One is Olam HaTohu, one is Olam HaTikun. And Olam HaTohu, the lights were too great to become enclosed and defined by vessels, by containers, by utensils. They departed from the vessels, and they remain what we call makif, peripheral, where the kalim break, and therefore Eisav is really split. There's Eisav below, and there's Eisav in his source. Eisav below is called a Rasha, and Eisav in his source is what? Is actually a expression of profound energy, profound light, which in many ways is deeper, more intense, higher, more sublime than the light of Olam HaTikun, which is mitigated, compromised, diluted, and limited, and manifested and enclosed within the containers of Tikkun. And this explains, the Baal HaTanya explains elsewhere and also earlier that the Gemara says in Masechta Soita, the Targum Yonis and Ben Uziel says, Reisha de Eisav be'itve de Yitzchak. Eisav died, and his head rolled into the grave of Yitzchak, and his head remains buried with his father in the bosom of Yitzchak. L'chayre, there's a halacha in Shulchan Aruch, ein koivrin tzaddik eitzel rasha. One does not bury a tzaddik near a rasha, and here it's not only near, it's one grave mamish, one cave. You have Yitzchak together with Eisav. The pshat is reisha de Eisav be'itve de Yitzchak. There's the head of Eisav and there's the body of Eisav, which symbolically represents Eisav in his head and Eisav in his manifestation. Eisav in his head is actually very deeply connected to Yitzchak. Eisav in his head, if you go to Eisav's source, if you go to Eisav's makif, the makif of Eisav is a tremendous oir of Kedusha, tremendous oir. In a way, the oir is more powerful even than the oir of Yaakov, because it's completely intense. There's absolutely no limitation to it. It's very, very infinite. The tragedy of it is it's not contained. In other words, it's not integrated into the conscious self, which is the difference between Ur Makif and Ur Pnimi, as we explained numerous times. Ur Pnimi means an Ur that is consciously integrated. In other words, you're cognizant of it. You make sense of it. You somehow control it. It's part of you. You could make it your identity. It's considered part of you. Why? Because the Ur is limited, and it comes into your identity in a fashion that you could make peace with it. It can define who you are because it's relatable to the you. The Ur Makif is beyond you, which doesn't mean it doesn't have an impact on you. It could have a tremendous impact on you, and maybe even deeper than the Ur Pnimi. But the impact is in a way that the consciousness of it is not recognizable at all. In fact, it's so intense that you may not even be consciously aware of it, or aware only of certain elements of it, and not aware of its source, not aware of its nature, not aware of its identity, but it's nonetheless very, very powerfully there. That's called the Ur Makif. So Eisav's tragedy is that his head and his body are two completely different realities. His head is by Yitzchak, and the body of Eisav, which represents how he processes himself, Eisav is completely different than Yitzchak. Ur Pnimi is not Keli. Yeah, Ur Pnimi is the Ur that infuses the Keli. It goes into the Pnimius of the Keli. But it's a type of Ur that is custom made to the consciousness of the Keli, to the chemistry of the Keli. So that the Keli can is uptighten, the Keli can relate to it, the Keli can be inspired by it. The Keli gets filled by it. Filled by it here we don't mean spatially, we mean spiritually. Filled by it means I'm filled by it in a way that actually relates to me. I go away with something that I can call mine. Or makif, I could never call mine. I may completely not even be aware of it. Not because it doesn't have an impact. The impact may be so intense that I can't even be aware of how much it is. Because if I'm aware of it, I'm already defining it in some way. And really it defines me much more than I define it. And that's Eisav's story. And therefore, Eisav is the Olam HaToyu and Yaakov is Olam HaTikun. So now he continues, he says, V'hine Yaakov choshav she'Eisav nizbarek kvar. Well, in Olam HaTikun, the difference is that the Oir is limited according to the Keli. In Olam HaToyu, the Oir is so powerful and the Keli could not contain it. So therefore, basically, it's overloaded, like we spoke about this, the electricity, and it crashes from its own intensity. In Olam HaTikun, the Oir is compromised. The Oir is mitigated. It's like when you dilute the wine with water. The Oir is weaker, and therefore, it's limited according to the Keli. It suits the Keli. It works with the Keli. It fits the Keli. It fits the Keli. The Ur goes through a process of tzimtzum. The Ur goes through a process of restriction. So Olam HaToyu was destroyed. On the debris of Olam HaToyu, Hashem built Olam HaTikun. Usually when you got a house, or you have a previous house, so you clean up the old house, and you get rid of all the debris and all the rubble and all the garbage, then you build your new house fresh, right? Besides in Yerushalayim, you're not allowed to get rid of the old because it's layers and layers and layers, thousands of years. So therefore you build on that's why Yerushalayim, there's nothing, you go to the basement of your house in Yerushalayim, you go a little lower, you're going to find some Roman Shirayim or the Bayis Rishon, Bayis Sheni before, right? Something you're going to find. Because it's built so many layers and layers. On a spiritual level, it's not that Olam HaToyu was destroyed. It was basically, it exploded. And what happened was the light departed, the Kalim fell and broke, and they don't know who they are anymore. So Hashem cleaned up the mess, and he said, let's build a new world. He built Olam HaTikun on the debris of Olam HaToyu without cleaning it up. So everywhere in Tikkun, there's still shards of Toyu everywhere. What is Tikkun? Tikkun is a whole different process. In Tikkun, the Oir fits the Keli. The Oir suits the Keli. The Oir is much more limited. The expression of the Arizal is that in Tohu, you have Oiris Mirubim and Kelim Mu'atim. In Tikkun, Oiris Mu'atim, but Kelim Mirubim. In Tohu, you have a lot of light and small vessels. Big light, small vessels. Big energy, small containers. In Tikkun, you have small energy, less energy, but large containers to contain them. The Maila of Tikkun is integration, peace, harmony, unison. There's integration between the Oir and the Keli. The divine energy infuses the Keli, and the Keli is inspired by it, it's defined by it. The chisaron of Tikkun is the light is much more compromised. The Maila of Tohu is that the light is awesome, but the chisaron is it has no staying power. It remains completely above. On the debris of Tohu, Hashem built Olam HaTikun. Why? Because ultimately integration between the two worlds is the ultimate purpose. Because Tohu has something to it that Tikkun will never have. So he didn't just want to destroy Tohu. He wanted Tohu. And Tohu gets destroyed. And now Tohu needs to be integrated within Tikkun. So in the ultimate kavanah, what you want is Oiris the Tohu bekelim the Tikkun. You want the chaotic light in the vessels of Tikkun. And for this, everybody has to go through a process. Tikkun has to be able to expand its kalim, to be able to contain that light. And Tohu has to be able to allow Tikkun to integrate the light. So that's the process that both Yaakov and Eisav have to go through in order to make peace between them. And in the ultimate world, you have the lights of Tohu in the vessels of Tikkun. So the vessels of Tikkun are not anymore containers that limit and crush the light of Tohu, but they actually facilitate the light of Tohu. But for that, there's a process, both of Tohu and of Tikkun. So on the debris of Tohu, Tikkun was built. So everywhere in Tikkun you have shards, fragments, pieces. Like after an explosion, you have all the debris of Tohu everywhere. In a person's own soul, you have the aspects of your soul that are from Tikkun. You have the aspects of your psyche that are from Tohu. Now, some people are predominantly more than others. More than others. And this is a vernacular. In the Alter Rebbe's Torah, this is it becomes an expression. Right? You'll say, this is a Tohu-dika person. This is a Tikkun-dika person. It's a deep way of describing a personality. Stam, I'll tell you a memory. I once had it, but it describes a situation. It was one Simchas Torah. So I was in 770, I was a child. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe was doing hakafas. There was maybe 10,000 people in the room. Legally, it's supposed to be 2,000 people in the room. It wasn't just packed, it was packed beyond packed. You threw a pin, it wouldn't land. So I was up in the front. So there was a particular Chabad Shliach who was extremely, extremely successful, but on the wild side. And he got a hakafa. So he went with a Sefer Torah to the bima. You had to go walk far. The bima was down in the middle of the shul. It's a big shul. So it was towards the end. You had to walk down to the bima. So as he got the Sefer Torah from the Aron Kodesh, he was walking to the bima. So he happened to pass by the Rebbe. So I was right there, so I heard it. I don't think anybody else heard it. So he looks at him, and I guess he kisses the Torah, and he looks at him, he gives a big smile, and he says, Nish Tohu. That was it. Nish Tohu. And he walked on. It was 2 words, but he was giving him a direction. Nish Tohu. Naturally, his Nish Tohu means not Tohu. No Tohu for you. In other words, he said it with a big smile, but he was telling him something. Your natural MO, your modus operandi is Tohu. Means you don't care about containers, you don't care about structure, you don't care about people you're dealing with. You're wild. You're wild. And the Rebbe knew his customers. It was a very elegant way of teaching him, of directing him. Nish Tohu means you have to learn how to contain your lights, how to contain your energy. There's a beauty in Tohu. The beauty is you're a bulldozer. There's nothing that stops you. There's absolutely nothing that stops you. It's pure infinity. The problem is it doesn't have staying power. Because whenever you don't have containers, kalim, the light will not be maintained. It will fade away into oblivion because you don't have the infrastructure to be able to contain it. You have great artists, for example, who are unbelievable talents, tremendous creativity, and they end up addicted to all types of substances, or they'll sometimes take their lives even. Because, as an artist once described, what's the feeling when you're playing in front of 50,000 or 75,000 people who adore you? They will be ready to lick the saliva that comes out of your mouth. They will kiss the earth that you're walking on. You know, real mamish, real celebrities of that level, of that stature. And you're beyond on top of the world. You're like a demigod. You're a semi-god worshipped, and the crowd is hollering and cheering and high on you. And then, as I once asked one of these people, I said, what's the hardest moment? He says, the concert is over. And everybody leaves. And you're in backstage, and the janitor says, hey, go, let's go. Go, it's time to go. No more. You know, he was out. That feeling, right? And then he goes home, and if he has a wife, what do you think she says when he comes home? Take out the garbage. Take out the garbage. The garbage is coming tomorrow, 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm not getting up. So take out the garbage. You weren't home for a week. How do you deal with that?
Says I'm God.
Huh? I'm God. God doesn't take out garbage. 50,000 people would just lick my spit. If they would just know that they could drive me home, they would sell their house to drive me home. Right? The taxi driver doesn't know who he is, and the janitor doesn't know who he is. His wife knows who he is. That's her mila. So first of all, it's very hard to stay married for these people. Second of all, that high that you get, the intoxication that you get from that validation, from that attention, is intoxicating. How do you maintain that in normal life? You can't have it every second. So tomorrow night you'll have another one. It'll become bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. I'm just giving one example where there's a tremendous amount of power and creativity and art, but to have an infrastructure, you need a lot of humility. You need a lot of bittul. And that takes a lot of internal work to be able to say, I will not operate only on a level of toyu. I will operate on a level of tikkun. The chisaron of tikkun is, it could kill creativity. Structure is awesome, but sometimes structure lacks the light, it lacks the intensity. The great dream is, can we integrate Eisav and Yaakov? Can we integrate Eisav and Yaakov? And different generations are prone to different forces more, and different personalities are prone to different forces more. Some people are intoxicated by structure. In other words, they're intoxicated by monotony. What makes them high is boredom. The more boring their day is, the better it is. They just love it. They thrive on it. And I should say, I once asked somebody what made them become a Baal Tshuva. And they told me they love the fact that God tells them what to do every minute. They love it. They love that 9:21, Sovzman Krishma. 10:21, Sovzman Tefillah. Plag, we're going for Mincha. They love that idea because Halacha is very structured. Shabbos, Yom Tov, Alois, Nates, Shkia. Who even knows the difference between Alois and Nates, right? Go to a regular crowd, yeah? Dawn break, sunrise. Maybe if you learned something in high school, you had to deal with astronomy. You learned about dawn break, sunrise, right? But here it's a whole mahalach, yeah? 4:51 Karbonis, 5:19 Hoidu, 3 seconds later Yehich Void, 9 minutes later Baruch, 1 minute you miss sunrise. It's like, well, so the truth is there's something very deep about it because it's rhythm, it's the beat, it's understanding nature, it's learning the structure of the universe. But you can understand that for some people it kills the light. But on the other hand, without Kalim, you're not going to have a light. Another example, and this played itself out in history many different times, is revolutions of the first generation and then of the second generation. All revolutions, the first generations, are often very successful because they ignite the idealism of the youth. What happens when the revolution is actually successful and they take over? Now you have a second and third generation who are born into it, and now it's not about the spirit anymore because you don't have to revolt, you don't have to fight, you don't have to die for it. Now you have to live for it. To live for it on a daily basis, you don't have that romantic drama. Take, for example, Zionism, the kibbutz movement. The early Zionists, they were sacrificed their lives. Literally, they put it on the line. And they were successful. They created a state. Now you have a second, a third, fourth generation. A lot of them is like, I'm not interested. The passion is not there. Because to create containers is often much harder than to generate light. To create containers, you have to be able to know how to translate the light into a daily ideal that continues on in high moments and in low moments. Yitzchak, in many ways, had to have more depth than Avram. Avram was the revolutionary. Yitzchak created containers. He dug wells. It's not an exciting thing to dig wells, but it creates containers. It creates places where the water could stay. Yitzchak was internal, he wasn't external. Containers are always very internal. They're deep, and they don't have the fanfare and the drama of the energy. Avram was the revolutionary, but without Yitzchak, there would have been nothing left to Avram. Look at Ve'esa Nefesh Asher Asu B'charim. What happened to all of Avram's chevra? They disappeared. The Meiri says that Avram converted more than half of humanity. In Pirkei Avos, the beginning, so Avram influenced more than half of civilization at the time. What happened to them? They all disappeared. They all faded away. Because Yitzchak wasn't as charismatic as Avram. He wasn't the same extrovert as Avram. Yitzchak was an introverted person. Avram is chesed. Yitzchak is gvura. They looked at Yitzchak. They said, "Sinish das." Boom. Next. They weren't ready for the humility of kalim, of containers. In many ways, this was the mila of the Magid over the Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov traveled. The Magid of Mezritch didn't travel. He remained in one place his whole life. They came to him. The Baal Shem Tov was a nuclear energy. The Magid created the containers for the Baal Shem Tov. It's a whole different avodah. Kalim are always quiet. They're always subtle. So, but Tikkun was built on the debris of Tohu, because there's Tohu everywhere. So in people's psyches, you'll see, there are people who are prone to Tikkun, there are people who are prone to Tohu. And even people who are prone to one or the other, there will be moments of life, and you could say, this is a moment of Tohu. Generally, a moment of Tohu means when something is very powerful and it can't be integrated. Psychologically, it's a moment that has a lot of energy but no containers. Now, you could let that destroy you, or you could say, no, my challenge is to open up my kalim to that energy. But when there's an energy that's very powerful and overwhelming, that's an energy of toyu, which is always makif. It's not integrated. Your kalim are not big enough for it. They're small. So they work with oir of tikkun, not with oir of toyu. Oir of toyu is very, very powerful. That's the oir of Eisav. On another level, it's the oir of Leah. Vayar Hashem, kisnu Leah. As we learned in the Maamer of Tov Kufayim Beis last week, right? It's a oir that doesn't sit well with me. I'm not comfortable with it. And you have to open yourself up to it. So now what happens here is, you understand? You're typhus. So toyu and tikkun is the theme that's always playing out in life. And that's why moments of crisis or moments of overwhelming pressure are often moments that can become moments of deep healing and deep creativity. And they can unleash usually your deepest greatness if you know how to channel the Tohu and not just let it remain an overwhelming experience that you completely can't integrate. But there's always tension between the two worlds because they're opposite worlds. And Tohu was destroyed in order to build tikkun on the debris of Tohu. And that's why there's an expression in Chassidus, you'll always have any people who learn any Sifrei Chassidus, they read this, but they don't know what it is. They just read it. It's called nitzutzes. You'll always hear the word birur hanitzutzes, right? Everyone knows this. All shalashudas, Chassidus, shatayres. Daf mevara zayin the nitzutzes, nitzutze kedusha. Mala zayin the nitzutzes. So these are words, Chassidim grow up with in their culture, doesn't mean anything to them. Nitzutzes, more nitzutzes, sparks of what, when. It's a very profound idea. Nitzutzes sparks are not flames, but they're sparks. Sparks have to be fanned into flames. Everywhere there are sparks of Olam HaTohu. And when you see those sparks, you could run away, or you could say, wow, this is a place where I want to spend time. Avodas habirurim means to be mevarer in the tzutzis of Tohu and extract them from the shells that eclipse their real light. Because really it's a very powerful light that fell down in the kalim that swallowed them up. But there's a lot of nitzutzis there. And to be able to sublimate those nitzutzis, those sparks, which are everywhere in ourselves and in people and in everything we come into contact with, it's the ability not to become a victim, but rather to elevate the spark, to sublimate the spark. And for that, you have to have that clarity and that depth that only tikkun can provide. And that's why the brachas ultimately have to go to Yaakov to one day deliver them to Eisav. Not that Eisav doesn't need them. Eisav is the one who needs them. But Yaakov is the one who's like the mafkid. He's the nifkid, He's the one who's holding on to the pikadon for Eisav. And that's why when Eisav breaks down crying, why did he steal the brachas from me? It's this innocent Eisav, because it's the makif of Eisav that's yearning for another chance. It's like, why did this happen? Almost on a super conscious level, he's crying and he doesn't even know why he's crying. He doesn't understand how deeply it affects him. But he's really weeping and crying, even though tomorrow he's going to go do kol davar asa shabaylam. The Gemara says Baal Nairam or Rasa and all the nice things or not nice things that Eisav did. And then the same Eisav is busy wondering how do you give meiser from straw and salt. So some people say he's just a hypocrite, a Rasha Merusha, low life, don't trust him. The Alter Rebbe says no, don't dismiss it so easily. You have to understand the tragedy of Eisav. Both are true. Ein Shem Shemayim Shaga B'fiv. And on the other hand, he's so idealistic. He wants to know how you give meiser from straw. Even straw he wants to give meiser from. He's so idealistic, he cares about mice in New Zealand. He will invest millions of dollars for research of saving whales in Indonesia. Right? Global warming could make him cry. He'll start crying about global warming. Right? And the tycoons are like, Nocha Meshugana. And he'll cry. And in some funny ways, it's like an expression. It's an expression, even if it's often distorted and completely not integrated. And when it'll come to a terrorist, suddenly the terrorist becomes the tzaddik hadar, because he's a freedom fighter, and it's not a stira. It's completely not a stira, because that's what makif is.
Bittel's answer or structure's answer?
Structure always comes. If you're in Tohu, structure is the biggest bittel, because it defies you. It defies you.
Define or defines?
Both. By defining you, it defies you. You don't want to be defined. Who wants to be defined?
But why would you want to break Tohu? No, that's all that creativity.
You don't want to break it.
We're used to it.
You want to channel it. You want it to be eternal. You want it to be eternal. You know the Maharal, the famous Maharal? I'll tell you an experience I once had that brought the two visions to my life very clearly. I was invited to Israel to speak for a national convention for women in Israel, in Eretz Yisrael, in Binyanei Ha'omah in Jerusalem. You know Binyanei Ha'omah? It's one of the largest, maybe the largest auditorium in Israel, in Yerushalayim for sure. So there were 6,000 women in the crowd, or more or less, around that point. It was, they have those lights so you can't see anybody. You just stand on stage. You have to make believe you see everybody, but your mom is blinded. But you can't tell anybody that I'm blinded and this is ridiculous. But it's a lot of theatrics. So I did. I was giving the keynote speech at this convention. It was a convention of a few days, and I did my thing. Whatever it was. I had a half an hour, probably 40 minutes. And I got a standing ovation for a long time. And women are not like men. They get inspired faster and less defense mechanisms, etc. Present company excluded, of course. And, okay, so it was very nice. And I'm walking out. So you walk out, a big speech, people follow. So I don't know, like 150 women following me. I hope it comes out right. But you get the point. And,
Ask questions.
to ask questions, of course, to ask questions.
Rabbis on tape, they're going to slice and dice this one.
To ask questions. So I'm walking out, so this one has this question, and what does this mean, and what do I do about my shalom bayis, and could you help my 15-year-old boy, and my 9-year-old doesn't want to go to school, and my 14-year-old this happened, and this one, whatever, all these types of questions. And so as they're talking and complimenting and giving me accolades, my cell phone rings. I take a look. I see it's my wife from New York. So I pick up the phone. My wife tells me, it's very nice that you go to Israel and you inspire people, but this house here is chaotic. It's chaotic. So I'm like, okay, give me 1 minute, Esty. I put down the phone, and then this woman is like, could you move here? Could you just move here? And then another one is like, says, could you come here every week? I'll pay a first-class ticket for you to come every week and speak to us. I'm like, sure, 1 minute. Yes. My wife is like, the kids are going to need therapy when they get older. They're not going to have a father, absentee. You're busy saving the world, neglecting your family. I'm like, Esty, 1 minute. Rabbi Jacobson, you were amazing. It was unbelievable. You were incredible. I'm like, sure, it's wonderful. 1 minute. And my wife is like, you have to really make a choice who you are and what God wants. And this is really not working. It's miserable over here. And I'm like, 1 minute. And then the women are like, well, this is like the best thing that ever happened. God sent you here, and so forth. And the contrast was a very vivid contrast. It would have been very easy for me to hang up the phone and say, I'll call you, when I get to the hotel, and take in all the accolades, which felt, frankly, very, very good, very validating. But there was a part of me that knew very clearly that the contrast is an important contrast. Because here, it's going to go for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. If I stay around, it'll be an hour, it'll be 3 hours, whatever it is. And ultimately, the phone call that was coming from New York, thousands and thousands of miles away, was somebody who really cares about me, who's connected to me, who makes sacrifices for me, who wants to build something real with me. It's not just inspiration and accolades and a standing ovation and so on and so forth. But the latter is always it takes much more discipline and much more sacrifice and much more humility and much more commitment, because it's not oiris, it's always in kalim. And to channel it in kalim is a very humbling experience. And it's choices that people always have to make between the two. On the other hand, there's something bohemian and infinitely available, exciting about no kalim. It's like endless possibilities. Right? That's why today so many people don't want to get married. A guy told me, a Jew in Manhattan, finally says, tell me one logical reason I should get married. Give me one reason. For romance, marriage kills romance. The suspense is much better. He says, for enjoyment, today after the 60s, you don't have to get married to have enjoyment. He says, to have a friend, they remain friends with you if you're not married to them. The moment you're married, it's always friends, you're sitting each other on each other's head, kvetching and complaining. He says, tell me one logical reason. Yeah. I once asked Jackie Mason, you know who that is? He repeats a lot of my jokes. So I once asked him, so he's an Alta Yiddish Bacher. His name is not Jackie Mason, his name is Yaakov Maza. I know his real name. His name is Yaakov Maza. Yaakov became Jackie, Maza became Mason. So I once, yeah, he was also, he got smicha, and the congregants were telling me you're in the wrong job. You'll become a comedian, you'll make a better parnasa. So kachava. His brother is also a Rav. So I once asked him if he regrets that he never got married. Okay, so he gave me a whole Jackie Mason answer. It's not for now. But then he says, my father used to say that marriage is an institution. I never want to be institutionalized. Okay. It's an institution. I don't want to be institutionalized. So you could look at it that way. So you have here a contrast of two opposing forces. And one has milas that the other one doesn't have, and one has to acknowledge that. And what happens often is, the tragedy is that tikkun shuts down to tohu because it's threatened by it. We're threatened by bohemian energy. A lot of us are threatened by free spirit. We don't like free spirit. We want you to be in the containers because you don't threaten us. But a tikkun that's threatened by tohu is ultimately a tikkun that's betraying its mission. The mission of tikkun is not to be threatened by tohu, but to ultimately expand its containers and contain tohu. And that's a completely different educational, spiritual, and psychological model. What are you thinking?
Something new.
It's something new, huh?
Yeah, it's new thought.
Mm.
I think most people are afraid of themselves that they're going to go off the derech. Once you release those boundaries,
Right.
So you're more afraid than you don't like it.
Right.
You're just scared of it.
Right.
They're like the gates on the ghettos,
Right. People are afraid of themselves, of their own energy, so they don't even allow their own energy to be expressed to themselves because it could be dangerous. But you know what? At the end of the day, God trusts your energy, you have to trust it.
I think that you're going to fail.
Or
You fail 100% if you don't try.
or you'll become infinite. One of the two.
So is that a paradigm shift, like a locomotive coming in, with a Tohu coming in once tikkun?
Right.
And a person can rise to the gate.
Right.
How do you define that moment as a moment of healing, deep healing?
Yes, it's a moment of healing because if you don't make peace with Tohu, ultimately Yaakov cut off his brother. It's a part of him. They're twins. Tohu and Tikkun are twins. They come really from the same, like all twins. What do they come? They split, but they come from the same seed, right? And then they split. Okay, there's two types of twins, but they come from the same shayrish. They come from the same mucker. They both come from divine energy, and they manifest themselves in two different ways. And Tohu goes through a traumatic process. In Tohu, there's trauma, but the trauma of Tohu comes because of its power, because of its beauty, because of its infinity, not because of its essential evil. Tikkun doesn't experience trauma, because in Tikkun there's never a break, there's never a breakdown. In Tohu there's trauma, and the Tohu after the trauma is not recognizable. It doesn't recognize itself anymore. It's lost in translation. It's lost in translation. That's what's called Shviras HaKelim.
Could that be a legitimate choice for somebody to say, I don't trust myself. I want to stay right here.
Is this a moral question or a psychological question? What? You want to know if you should encourage it as a therapist?
I think it's a halachic question.
I think it's an expansion question.
Listen, there are moments, I would say essentially this was probably the core issue of the machlokes of the Vilna Gaon against the Baal Shem Tov. Probably this issue. The way it was garbed was in different words, but this was the real issue. Why expose the masses to nuclear energy? Don't do it. Keep it structured and let the few people who get it have access to it. I think the Baal Shem Tov's argument was nuclear energy has been exposed in the world. There's a nuclear race. If Kedusha doesn't compete on that level, if Yiddishkeit, all Yiddishkeit has to say is, we know how to follow tradition and we have good chicken soup, and if you stick here, you'll be able to go to the chassan of your kids. It's powerful. Maybe it's powerful, but ultimately you lost the energy of the world, and you will lose the energy of millions, because people have very deep souls and they're expressing them and they're searching for them. So if Yiddishkeit can't contain the kelim for olam hatoyu, ultimately you will lose generations and generations, especially as the world progresses. It's supposed to be that way. People will be looking for a deeper relationship with God. In the world of Mashiach, for example, the motivation is not going to be reward and punishment. The motivation is going to be, I want a relationship. I want truth. I want real truth. But truth is powerful. Truth is deep. Truth is raw. Truth is naked. And yet, I think we say every morning, Al Teviyenu L'Dei Nisayon. People have to understand their limits. And for a person to say, I'm a free spirit and therefore I go everywhere, I do everything, is often suicidal. So you can't become this delusion, and that's where Halacha comes in. Halacha is a very powerful barometer to examine where you're really going. If you're ultimately worshiping your quest or you're worshiping God. That's the key. You'll see in all the Maamerim, when people get into it, they can become frustrating. Because the Alter Rebbe will never allow a person to just allow their awareness to take them wherever their awareness wants to take them. He will always at the end come back and say, V'lo zochar sar hamashkim es Yosef. The problem of the sar hamashkim was he forgot what Yosef is all about, as we learned in Miketz. In other words, at some point he will say, and what does God want? And what does God want with this? If not, it becomes self-worship. I worship my spirit, my identity. And the ultimate question is, what are you needed for in life? What are you needed for in life? And that's where the Ur takes you back to Kalim. But that's a very powerful challenge that a person can have. That makes the key distinction between a life with Halacha, a life without Halacha, a life with Torah, a life without Torah.
So is it true that the answer to this question is if somebody decides that he's going to become Eisav because he can't stay still? Everybody is story. If you don't create this, then if you don't trust yourself, then you're going to go the other way.
Sometimes there's stages in life where a person is entitled to say, and they needed to say, I can't think for a few years. I can't think for a few years. It's not for me. Sometimes there's room for that. Sometimes there's room for that. Sometimes you have to know who you are, what your limits are, and the most important thing for you is v'chai b'hem, to live, not to die. God doesn't need you to die. Sometimes there's room for that. There's no question. But not out of fear, not out of insecurity, not out of the need to crush. Simply for a person who understands we all have limits and we have to respect them. You have to know who you are, you have to know who your children are. I mean, in an ideal world, it's different, but we don't live in an ideal world. Right? The Gemara says, you tell a Nazir, don't get close to a vineyard. Don't get close to a vineyard. People who struggle, especially with certain, you have a heavy crush on somebody, or a heavy crush on a particular substance. The bohemian spirit can just make you, destroy you. You have to say, this is what I struggle with. I can't go there. I cannot go there. It's just who I am. We're also weak. We're strong, but we're weak. So I think that's part of it, acknowledging that and not being in denial of it. I think it's a very important idea.
So a kid who's like super and the mother praise him like, wow, look at you don't have to shot that hard.
No.
You're only 5 years old. But that parent has to say, listen, you're still a kid, you have to go to bed, you gotta be.
Yeah, you always need a balance. You always need a balance between Oyer and Keli, always. But I'll tell you where the issue comes out. You have a father who sometimes struggles with a child. You'll see two types of fathers or mothers. You'll have a father who sees things in his child that scare him very deeply. Let's call it Tohu. Okay? If he never made peace with his Tohu, if, as Dr. Lamb says, he came and said, I shut down, I don't deal with this, what he sees in his child will drive him mad. Until his last breath, he will not forgive his child. He will fight him and fight him and fight him because his child is bringing up everything in him that he doesn't want to see and he ran away from. And their relationship will deteriorate from day to day, from week to week. He will judge him, he will get him angry, and he will start hating him. And he'll throw him out of the house. And he'll justify it in the name of God, always. Always in the name of God. But now take Yitzchak and Eisav. Yitzchak was a big tzaddik. Eisav was a big Rasha. Yitzchak was not naive. That's why he wasn't upset at Rivka. But Yitzchak understood very well Tohu. And he made space for it in his soul. So Eisav did not drive him mad. He could love Eisav, and he could remain connected to Eisav through thick and thin. Why? Not because he agreed with Eisav's decisions, not because he didn't want Eisav should live a different life, but because he knew the Eisav within himself. And whenever you know that within yourself, it doesn't frighten you to the point that you have to destroy the other person. You don't have to destroy the other person. You have to embrace the other person. You have to, sometimes you disagree. That's fine. You have a different value system. But you're not destroyed by the other person because he's triggering realities in you that you deal with. You understand them. You have a place for them, and you even understand the certain kedusha that exists in them. It's a whole different way of education. You don't compromise. Today people often, they look at two extremes. There's the liberal education and there's the conservative education. Right? The person who has no spine, who doesn't stand up for Messiah, who doesn't tell the kids it's not how we do it. And then there's the fathers who are mechanech. Again, it's black and white. Understanding the child doesn't mean, right, you sold your soul. On the contrary, it means that your kalim are not kalim that are afraid of Ur. They're not afraid. And therefore they can appreciate and tune into the world of the other and embrace the journey of the other person. Even though there may be some disagreements. And at the end of the day, it won't be so simple to create a reconciliation on the most optimal level. And you'll see this throughout with Yitzchak. He'll do it with Eisav, not only with Eisav, he'll do it with Eisav's son. It's a fascinating thing. Rashi says on this week's parsha, Ki b'makli avarti es hayarden. I passed the Jordan with my stick. So what does Rashi say? My stick, he had nothing else. You send your son away for 20 years. How wealthy was Yitzchak? He was a multimillionaire. He can't give Yaakov $1 million to be able to buy a house, to be able to buy a car, to be able to shtel of a family. A stick you give him, not even a tuna sandwich. So what does Rashi say in Vayetze? Why did Yaakov cry when he met Rachel? He says, Avi Abba Avram, when he sends Eliezer just to get a girl for a shidduch for a few days, what does he send him with? An entourage, 10 camels, 10 people, Zoh. He gives him everything. Why? To impress the mechutin. It's very important to impress the mechutin, especially if they're from Iraq. I didn't come here for a few days to get a shidduch. I came here to live for years and years. I have nothing. Nothing. Avram gives Eliezer everything. Yitzchak couldn't give Yaakov psabissel naden, a little money. This is how a Yiddish shidduch is made. So what does Rashi say from the Medrash? What's the story? He gave him a lot. Eisav sent his son Elifaz to go kill Yaakov. He comes to Yaakov and he wants to kill him. Zakt Rashi, ulefisha godal b'cheker shel Yitzchak, monas yadav. Because he grew up in the bosom of Yitzchak, he couldn't kill Yaakov. On the other hand, Kibbutz in Esav's family was top priority. So he tells Yaakov as a Rav, Ma Esa l'tzivu shel Abba, the Tata, the Tzaddik, wants me to kill you. I can't kill you because I know you. But my father said to kill you. So Yaakov says a shir. And Yaakov says, Ani chashav kemeis. So take away all my money? I understand. Why doesn't Yaakov tell him, your father's a tzedreiter, ritzeach, rasha, merusha, terrorist? Yaakov is giving him a shir. Take away all my money and Ani chashav kemeis. And b'meile. It's fine. And Elifaz does it. Well, you have a sprach with him, so Yaakov comes broke. It's a funny thing, yeah? It's a modnazach. And where did Elifaz go? B'cheker shel Yitzchak. Who was Elifaz? So if you know the Rashi's in Vayishlach, the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Elifaz was more corrupt than Eisav. Rashi brings from the Psukim, it's Gemara in Sanhedrin, what Elifaz did. Elifaz lived with the wife of his father. Had a child, Kairach. Elifaz lived with the wife of another man and had a child, Timnah. And then he married his own daughter. Timnah Isa Pilegesh le'Elifaz. And from that came out Amalek. So you have here a tzatzke on all levels. Yitzchak, the Pasuk says and told us, was a Navi. Elifaz is growing up. What should have Yitzchak told Elifaz? Elifaz, take a hike. Gadol b'cheker shel Yitzchak. He grew up in the bosom of Yitzchak, in the bosom. Yitzchak spent time with him, Yitzchak was makar of him, knowing, and this person became a mushchas, a mushchasim, be'emes a mushchas. Married his own daughter, and Sheva Mitzvah by Goyim, it's unheard of. You don't marry your daughter, you don't have intimacy with your daughter. And from that, Taka came Amalek, a great product, a great bachirul, Amalek. But Yitzchak, not only did not throw him out of the house, he raised him. So you look at the story, you say, okay, he wasted his time. He was busy being Mekarev, a Rasha Merusha. Wait, he wasted his time? Or maybe he saved the whole Klal Yisrael because of that? What would have happened if not? Elifaz would go and murder Yaakov, and not one of us would be sitting here today, not one Jew would be alive today. Why? Because Yaakov would have been dead before he got married. Because Yitzchak spent time with Elifaz and gave him his soul, the entire Jewish people was saved from being Mekarev, not a Jewish kid. This is a non-Jewish kid. A non-Jewish kid, and not a good non-Jewish kid. Beyond OTD. And because of that, the Jewish people were saved. How does Yitzchak do this? Yitzchak is a Navi. Yitzchak is Yiras Hashem. Yitzchak is Pachad. Yitzchak more than Avram. Avram Mele, love, love, love. Yitzchak is Gvuri, Yira, Elifaz. Eisav Meleps, your son, Elifaz, Nachlaeniko. The pshat is because real Yiras Hashem never comes from fear of reality, from fear of truth. Yiras Hashem, on the contrary, means endless commitment to truth. And therefore, Yitzchak Avinu can create space in his soul for the reality of Eisav, for the reality of Elifaz. And he could understand the makif, and he could try to bring it out in them. He's not judgmental, he doesn't have to destroy them, because they're not triggering in him things that he's frightened of within himself. Because he is wholesome, because he's expansive, so therefore fakert, he could see the spark and he could see the distortion, and he could do birur and tzutzis, he could do avodas habayra. How much the success rate is? Listen, people have bchira. Yitzchak can't live anybody's life. Eisav has bchira and Elifaz has bchira. They made their bchira. Leah made her bchira. You see, Leah also had challenges. Leah made her bchira, but that's what Yitzchak accomplished. And Lepaya, look what happened. The Jewish people were saved. That's the key difference. Okay. The hast material. Huh? The Maral. I'll tell you a story. I'll finish with a story. I was invited to speak at a another mice of mine. I was invited to speak at Amudim. There's a Yitzvi Glock. He's an Askin, and he deals a lot with issues of abuse. He made an organization called Amudim that brings together Jewish social organizations that deal with kids at risk. So he had 80 organizations. They met for 2 days in Deal, New Jersey. So of course, you eat and you go to sessions, then you go back to eat. It's Jewish conventions. The focus is the food, and you do a lot of sessions. So I was invited to give the keynote address one morning there by breakfast, after breakfast. So when everybody was eating their healthy corn muffins with omelets, so I gave a speech and I finished. So a Yid came over to me. His name is Dr. David Pelkovitz. He's a professor of psychology in Yeshiva University. And he's been a therapist, I think, for around 35 years. I think he lives in New Jersey. And he says, Rabbi Jacobson, I want to share with you a personal experience that I had. And he shared with me the following experience. It's a whole long story. I'm going to tell you Bekitzer Devart. He says, many years ago, a boy came to see him in his office, around 15-year-old boy, La'erech 15 or 16. What was the issue? The issue was he couldn't make it in any yeshiva. Every yeshiva, a few weeks, a few days, he was thrown out. In at the age of 15, he was probably in 9 yeshivas. Came from a very prominent Torah-focused family in Flatbush. Father wanted him to go to therapy. Belkowitz tells me, sometimes a patient comes in and you see there's absolutely nothing wrong. He says, I love this kid. He's a great kid, smart, interesting, sharp, charismatic, talented. I'm thinking to myself, he doesn't need therapy. He's pretty good off. People just don't know how to deal with him. So I tell him, he tells me that I tell him next week, bring in your family. Bring in your father, your mother, your brothers, your sisters, and if you have grandparents, bring in your grandparents. So To me, it was surprising that Tepelkovitz, I never heard a therapist brings in a Zayd and a Bubba to therapy. You can ask the Holocaust survivor, what are your feelings about your mother? Yeah. Who even had a mother? If you had a mother, you were happy. Right? It's not a generation that was busy analyzing, dissecting emotions. If you stayed alive, it was already a ness. So he says, you're right, but I had a hunch that the grandparents should be there. So he followed his hunch, interestingly. So the next week they came in. So he asked the father to speak why he wanted his son in therapy. So the father says, listen, we have a family of such B'nai Torah. And he goes down the list. You know, this one is a Rosh Hashiva, this one Maggid Shir, this one Rosh Koil, this one finishes Daf Yomi 7 times. This one gives a Shir and Daf Yomi 6 times a day. Before Alois, after Alois, before Shachas, after V'sik, 9 o'clock. This one is this one made Hatzalah, this one is Rosh Haskanim, this one runs this one is the biggest Baal Chesed in the continent. And then his daughters are Maamer, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, graduates of the best seminaries and their husbands. So they have one boy. And Maamer, it's a busha. Wastes his time, good head, wastes his time, doesn't learn a thing. And I feel bad for him, I love him, and I feel bad for us. It's very embarrassing. So the Zayda, the father of the boy, gets up and he says he wants to say something. And he tells everybody a story. He says that he grew up in Poland. And he had a huge family and everybody was in yeshiva. And he was the only kid who was, today they would diagnose him with all the diagnoses. He was out of yeshiva. So he was very street smart. He was savvy. He was shrewd. He was sharp. And he says one day, he was out there in 1938, and he picked up a book, Mein Kampf, by Adolf Hitler, Yamach Shemoy. He comes home and he tells his father, Tata, Poland is on the border of Germany. Hitler's going to do what he says he's going to do. There won't be anybody left. Let's take the family and run before it's too late. Father looks at me and says, Head of Red Narishkeit. Stop speaking nonsense. You speak like this because you're not learning. If you would sit and learn like your brothers, you wouldn't read this stupid material and you wouldn't speak like this. He says, Father, listen, I should be learning, I should be in yeshiva, that's true. But you know that I'm sharper than my brothers, and you know that I'm smart, and you know that I'm savvy, and you know that I have feelings for things, and I'm right. And I'm telling you, there won't be left a Jew in Poland. We should run. My father rebuked me and chastised me. He says, this is, you patters that sight, you're wasting your time. And I told my father, I'm going to have to run alone. I'm not staying. And I left my family and I crossed the Atlantic Ocean, 1938. He says, I was the only survivor. My entire family was murdered. I was the only survivor. Then he says, I look at all my grandchildren and I ask myself, is there anyone who's like me? And that boy I always saw was my replica. So all of you should have respect for this boy, because none of you would be able to sit and learn today. You wouldn't be alive if not for me, and if not for a boy like him, who was different, but because of him you're all alive today. No one of you should ever disrespect this person or put him down, because it's only because of a spirit like his that all of you are alive today. He sat down. Bhagavad says there was stunned silence in the room. You can imagine. They didn't know the story. He says, I wanted to share this with you. So I look at him, I say, listen, you can't tell me a story and not finish it. It doesn't work. In my work, das doch mamish midas achzarius. He says, what do you want to know? That's the story. I says, Heint. Who halt is Heint? He says, a Heint. He says, I'll tell you. The grandfather had a huge successful business. He was very wealthy. In fact, he said in the meeting, he told his son that if you continue this path, I'm going to erase you from my will. If you continue this path, I'm going to erase you from my will. Classic Holocaust survivor who's fearless, who made a lot of money. He said he took his grandson into his business. So I said, what's now? He says, today that boy runs the whole business and all of his brothers work for him. That requires perspective. It requires vision. Doesn't mean there's no challenge to deal with, but it means you understand souls, you understand energies, and you don't create boxes, and when somebody doesn't fit into your box, you go crazy, mad. It doesn't work that way. And the result is from one extreme to another extreme. Because of this attitude, ultimately, the Jewish people were saved, both in this story and in Elifaz's story.
This class is brought to you by the yeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.